Yeah, you're stuck in here now, Spunky. Yeah, you're stuck in here. You're stuck in here now. All right, we'll start here in a minute. I don't know who's going to all show up. Usually it's... Oh. No worries. Understand. Did the music go away? All right. Let's close down the reading. I mean the music, and let's get started. So we're going over the 5 different areas that they want to talk about. I would go back, but let's see here. Area 4, occupation everywhere. Area 3, abolishing incarcerations, prisons, juvenile detention facilities, jails, and border security. Then the other one was... Let's go back. Area 2 was ending border town violence. And then number 1 was defunding police, immigration, and customs enforcement, customs and border protections, and child protective services. So those are the areas. Let me go back to where I was at. And now we're on Area 5, abolishing imperial borders. All right, let's begin. European colonial powers brought notion to both private property as well as nation states from Europe to the Americas. One of the first things did was impose borders and national boundaries on lands they occupied. The doctrine of discovery enshrined in the Catholic Church, papal bulls, and still cited by the U.S. Supreme Court, stated that European power that quote-unquote discovered a land had sole rights to purchase or steal land from indigenous people who lived on it. This exclusion based on colonial occupation and discovery was the basis of European-style sovereignty that divided indigenous lands around the world with borders. Since that time, borders have been used to control and restrict the movements of certain populations of people, but free up and allowing the movement of capital. The United States recognizes no borders other than its own when it seizes land through violent military force or topples governments of other nations who refuse to bend to the will of its corporations. This is the definition of imperialism. The borders play a key role. In fact, the first act of U.S. imperialism was its western expansion from the original boundaries of its 13 colonies into the territories held by indigenous people and supposedly protected by treaties. Manifest Destiny, which called for the U.S. to dominate, quote, from the sea to shining sea, end quote, made indigenous people the first victims of U.S. imperialism. In 1832, the Monroe Doctrine of foreign policy tenets upheld by successive U.S. administrations that acts as if the entire Western Hemisphere is the exclusive domain of the United States, exerting its control over Latin America. The U.S. continues its imperial occupation, manipulation, and economic domination of Central and South America, and has spread its imperial reach even further around the world with its over 800 known military bases. The U.S. military and capital have no borders. Only people of limited means are bound by borders. This emerging of borders with nationalism, capitalism, and imperialism requires us to develop a comprehensive analysis of how borders restrict, control, and govern the movement of indigenous and other radicalized people. Be right back, 2 seconds. Okay, now you can leave since I'm opening the door. come in here, Rufus. Sorry, everybody. I gotta go get some water. I get some water real quick. Sorry, everybody. No, don't close it out. Go on, Bubba. Go on there. Go up there. The U.S. has restricted migration from its southern borders with Mexico since it invaded and declared war during the Texas and California republics of Anglo settler occupied the future states and requested U.S. military support. This started the U.S.-Mexico War. Following the Mexican Revolution and after Chinese peoples migrated through Mexico because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the U.S. marginalized its southern borders and the first border patrol operations began. It wasn't until September 11th, 2001, attacks that the U.S. had an opportunity to quote-unquote secure the nation by clamping down on migration from the southern border with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. The national security apparatus, along with the media, have created a narrative of a border crisis, quote-unquote, that has continued to justify inhumane border enforcement in the name of national security. By declaring the crisis and framing caravans and asylum seekers fleeing the effects of U.S. imperialism as an invasion of the nation's borders, the U.S. has been able to mobilize both enormous resources and public support for tighter border controls and violence against migrants along the border. The border and its violence extends beyond even the physical boundaries of the nation. The U.S. military and police have established surveillance systems and military training programs in other countries in order to prevent migrants from reaching the U.S. The series of restrictive laws following the September 11th, 2001 attacks allowed border enforcement activities like checkpoints and radical profiling and racial profiling further inwards from the militarized border zone within 100 miles of the actual national borders and coasts. Migrants within this internal boundary face widespread surveillance, profiling, exploitation, and the risk of deportation or incarceration every day. These forms of border imperialism demonstrates how important it is to recognize the regulatory control of the borders that the borders represent. This control happens through the surveillance of bodies, management of exclusion, and administration of punishment. Borders function as structures of segregation and weapons of empire. Articles 13 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights states the right to freedom of movement as an intrinsic human right. Given the mass migration of humans and other than humans from the global south to the global north, which itself is caused by U.S. imperialist colonialist practices and capitalist-driven climate change, we must open and abolish imperial borders to life. As the Arab Resource and Organized Center, AROC, has spelled out, freedom of movement is a fundamental human right. The freedom to stay is the right not to be deported or restricted based on race, ethnicity, or religion. Indigenous people have the right to stay and live in their own homelands. The freedom to move is the right to migrant or move without restrictions and threats of violence. Based on race, xenophobic migrations policies, refugees have the right to sanctuary. The freedom to return should be granted to refugees, such as Palestinians, to return to their homelands from which they have been expelled. Families and relatives separated by detentions, migration, or relocation have the right to return to their reunited with their loved ones. the freedom to resist any impingement on these fundamental human rights to movement and return is also a fundamental human right. Let us not forget, no one is illegal on stolen land except for those who have stolen it. This is why our most potent challenge to border imperialism is indigenous sovereignty itself. Multiple indigenous nations have been bisected by the northern and southern border and are facing destruction of their territories and ancestral burial sites by the construction of the border wall. In 2020, land defenders of the, oh my gosh, QUMAYAAY and the, okay, I'm going to put these two names in the comments section. Hold on a second, because these are important. So I'm gonna make sure everybody knows the names, because it's not my, it shouldn't be your guys' fault that I can't pronounce it. There's my comments. So the first one is Y, and the second is H. This is a person's name, I think. We'll find out. So I think this is a person's name, or these are nations, I think. So these are the two names it's mentioning right there. The ones I can't pronounce. Kim Yi Yayi and Tuhona I'm destroying it. Land defenders of those two nations have resisted construction of the border wall and have faced violent repression from police, Border Patrol, National Guard, and National Park Service. We must support these nations in asserting and defining their sovereignty that exists beyond the borders of the U.S. settler state. We must also work to build relations with indigenous peoples from the global south, especially those whose people are migrating to the U.S. due to American economic policy, military interventions, and support of right-wing governments. We should build connections between these nations and indigenous movements in North America, Oceania, Asia, Africa, and the I say Western Asia, they said Middle East, so that indigenous peoples globally can express solidarity in the face of continued anti-indigenous violence. Closer to home, we can begin to build upon a tribal sovereignty that our nations have fought for by pushing for sanctuary resolutions in tribal governments that offer migrants protection from deportation, detention, and harassment. This expression of solidarity to our distant kin is also an important assertion of nationhood and sovereignty. The settler state should not be able to dictate who can or cannot remain on land it stole. Indigenous nations must lead the challenge to the very notion of settler control of land, and non-indigenous relatives of those displaced from their own homelands can reciprocate by acknowledging indigenous sovereignty. U.S.-dominated global capitalism has created conditions around the world that cause people to be displaced, to flee poverty or violence, and to seek other places to live. Well, let me take a drink. This has been particularly evident in the migration of Africans from across the continent to Europe, which carved up Africa into colonial territories in the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. By the early 20th century, Europe controlled the vast majority of Africa and continued until the decolonialization struggle of the 1950s and 1960s. Even now, Europe's economic policies and its forcing African nations into debt continues to dominate without being directly in control of it as it had in the past. Yet, when African people flee the conditions created by European exploitation, they are met with the fortress of borders enforcement, walls, and inhumane apathy towards migrants who have droned across the Mediterranean Sea. We urge everyone to turn their attention to the global nature of migration and particularly its roots in economic policies and military interventions. With the growing threat of climate change causing people to migrate, it is important to note how the U.S. military apparatus is preparing to exclude and contain climate refugees. Colonial borders imposed limits not only on humans but on our other than human relatives as well. Many plants and animals inhabit the spaces dissected by the border, and their migratory patterns are threatened by the further militarization of the border with the construction of even taller walls. In the past, the U.S. has destroyed our animal relatives in the name of imperialism, as when they forced Dene Nation citizens to reduce the number of sheep grazed on the nation's land in order to fit within the reduced size of the reservation, or when the U.S. military nearly eradicated the buffalo when they were trying to expand their territories westward and could not defeat the I'm going to put this as a military. So it's another indigenous name. I'll put it in the comments again because I will just tear it apart. I got to get better at this. All right, hold on. Where did I find it? There it is. So it's OCETI SAKOWIN. And it's their military. This military. And could not defeat that people's military. Oh, did I spell it? What did I do? Oh yeah, that's right. I think so. Make sure. That's an I. Yes. Oh, there's just something in the way of it. Okay. All right. Back to it. Sorry. The southern border now threatens our human and other than human relatives that have always migrated freely across these lands before colonization. Therefore, we can call for the abolition of border imperialism in our border movement to end the occupation because no one is illegal on stolen land. All right, that's the end of part 1. Part 2, healing our bodies, reinvesting in our common humanity. Introduction. This is the introduction to it. Often in indigenous knowledge, we see humans are the youngest species. Because of this, we rely on our older non-human relatives to guide us and to give us structure on how to live in a good way. From the plants, rocks, animals, and hydrothermal vents of the seafloor to the arid mountains of colonial Chile, there are countless communities found throughout the earth. Not all of them human, and there are countless relationships that have been gifted to the cared for between these communities. For this relationship with the earth, the sun, and days. We've also seen the relationship that we have with the cycles and patterns of our own bodies, the seasons of our flesh. It is from the plants and the animals and the air and the water that we draw our patterns of organization of cultures and societies. Our bodies operate in tandem in balance with the natural world. This acknowledgement of respect for and the dedication of the life of things, their rhythm and organization is how we heal our bodies. This basic assertion has always been the root of indigenous struggle for life, and it will be the path towards liberation once again. But today, as we have been for hundreds of years, indigenous people are profoundly unfree. We are under constant attack by capitalism, whereas our culture is based on regeneration. Capitalism is based on death and seeks to kill kill all that gives life. There we go. Capitalism is an infection that has forced our cell to adapt to its hoarded wealth, courting of the earth, and mass depletion of resources. Our lives have been made into numbers and statistics, debt packages, experiments, and commodities. Since the arrival of the Europeans, indigenous nations have struggled fiercely against the project of capitalism. Ours has been a struggle for life. We are constantly delegitimized by policies and reforms that refuse to address the root of the infection causing us to suffer. Capitalism creates Capitalism creates and accumulates wealth based on speculation or making profit based on changes in the value of goods on the market, and searches constantly for new frontiers of value. Under neoliberalism, capitalism has turned our well-being and our suffering into marketplace where human life is sold, commodified, traded, and consumed. Neoliberal capitalism financializes everything, turning all aspects of life and death into cascading horizons for exploitation and profit and interest of ruling class, including the unexpected windfall that COVID-19 has provided for uber wealthy like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Our suffering is bundled and rebundled as debts for Wall Street speculators to exploit and sell. When we are being financialized, we are being unalived, caged, and harassed, or neglected and abandoned. Sometimes this happens all at once. Under neoliberal capitalism, every day people have to work longer and harder, while wages have decreased, benefits have dried up, state-sponsored support mechanisms have evaporated through privatization and budget slashing. These conditions led to the decade of mass anti-austerity uprising in nations like Greece, Lebanon, Chile, France, Ecuador, and the United States. Part of the larger global movement against social and economic abandonment, these uprisings have held states accountable for policies that shrink public programs for food, housing, education, transportation, and healthcare in the name of, quote, fiscal responsibility, end quote, while simultaneously offering subsidies and incentives for multinational corporations to continue plundering the earth. As they facilitate new forms of capital accumulation for these corporations, neoliberal states throughout the world simultaneously claim to have a scarcity of resources. They peddle this narrative to justify the slashing of social welfare, but it is simply false. Why else would military spending increase during neoliberal period, or the wealthiest 5% of the world's population get even richer? Hello. The anti-austerity movement has forced us to confront this disturbing truth. Capitalist states are not concerned with public welfare. Rather, they function as hoarders for the ruling class, which watches with indifference while billions perish. This is apparent to how wealthy nations like the United States have handled the COVID-19 pandemic, encouraging American citizens to identify themselves as consumers who should be shopping around for the best vaccine to line the pockets of pharmaceutical corporations, rather than look to the state for assistance or solutions. The U.S. government's response to the pandemic confirms that suffering is the only option on the table when it comes to capitalism. We have co-signed to endure even expanding even expanding deserts of abandonment. Meanwhile, the ruling class consoles everyday people by offering paltry, weak-willed policies to, quote, create jobs, end quote, and, quote, stimulate the economy, end quote. Such policies and reform produce almost no change, and people are left to sit and fester, watching their relatives barely survive or die. This is what counts for progress, quote unquote, and quote unquote success. In a world controlled by capitalism, as the anti-austerity movement has shown, it is simply too much to bear. We must therefore develop and fight for alternatives to capitalism, not as an aspiration, but as a matter of urgent survival. This requires an informed, practical, and action-oriented approach. We believe the issues we pinpoint in this chapter are the most important areas of struggle that can wield the greatest and fastest gain towards alleviating our relative suffering, and building a larger movement to dismantle capitalism. Capitalism will fall. We are certain of this. We can hear our bodies by continuing to hammer cracks into the foundation, eventually pounding it into dust that joins the soil from which new life can emerge. Ooh, I love that. Creating a new soil where new life can emerge. I love that. Great analogy. Great analogy. Area 1, citizens of equal rights. Citizenship and equal rights. There are currently an estimated 47 million immigrants within the borders of the United States, of which approximately 12 million are undocumented. War, unequal trade relations, global wage disparity, underdevelopment, and in climate change have created the conditions for mass migration from the global south to the global north. Migrants from the global south face treacherous journeys, criminalization and detentions, family separations, trafficking, unsafe or underpaid working conditions, murder, and severe restrictions on becoming citizens or legal workers. While progressives, leftists, radicals in the United States have shown outrage about the flagrant brutality of U.S. immigration policies along the U.S.-Mexico border, there is still a denial of U.S. imperialism in causing migration in the first place. We urge everyone to understand how U.S. imperialism operates. First, the United States continues to play a pivotal role in causing war and conflicts and in overthrowing global South governments in Libya, Syria, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Nigeria, Honduras, Bolivia, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Haiti, Colombia, and elsewhere, using hybrid war techniques that combine ideological and military justification for intervention. Elsewhere in the world, the United States has foments economic and political destabilization, such as by using sanctions and conditional aid in countries that it deems quote-unquote hostile to U.S. capitalism. According to United Nations, neoliberal economic policies are responsible for most of the migration from these areas of the world to the global north and to other global south nations. Austerity in the global south has made the lives of local peoples so unlivable that they must flee to find stable, sustainable work, healthcare, education, and housing. Second, the United States has shaped the world economy predicated on free trade agreements that favor the wealthy nations. These agreements open up markets of global south to heavily subsidized food commodities for the global north, causing local farms to go out of business. Free trade agreements are designed to favor large corporations, including big I think it says agribusinesses. I think agribusinesses is agricultural businesses. This puts small farmers throughout the world at a peril. These trade agreements pit workers and farmers against each other, leading to decline of labor rights, environmental regulations, and commodity markets that are important to small-scale farmers like coffee growers. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, of 1994 was an instructive example of the effect of U.S. commodities like industrial farmed corn, which are supported by federal subsidies and price protection, being sold at low prices in Mexico and Central America, where subsistence farmers cannot compete. Many of these displaced corn farmers fill the ranks of migrants who have had to either move to urban areas in their home countries or make the passage to the United States. In addition, these agreements open up land and resources for privatized development, causing the displacement of indigenous populations and leaving environmental catastrophes. Enshrined in these arguments are rules that ensure low wages and global wage disparities, as well as little to no protections for environment. These conditions force many migrant in searching for jobs. Third, climate change. I'm gonna make sure. I'm gonna go look back. Who is this? I have no idea if that's a. Okay, that is not a refugee. Making sure. I know people like to. Just making sure I didn't miss anything. Doesn't look like it. All right. Third, climate change causes by the burning of fossil fuels is also causing desertification, drought, stronger hurricanes, rising sea levels, and increasingly extreme weather patterns. This is an exacerbating conflicts and forcing migration. The United States has about 5% of the world's population, but consumes 25% of the world's oil. Additionally, the U.S. military is the #1 global consumer of oil. The United States is also the #1 greenhouse gas emitter on the planet. Given the damage U.S. imperialism and global capitalism continues to cause throughout the world, our movements for decolonization and liberation must address both directly. We must start by embracing and participating and practicing, an internationalist outlook and commitment, building a mass anti-war, anti-imperialist movement to end war, sanctions, and resource extractions must be the priority of every progressive and left organization, regardless of their specific issue, quote unquote. Strengthening the international labor movement and uniting workers from the imperial core with workers in the global south must also be a priority and should bring together representatives of workers, movements from the world, from all around the world. One of the demands of such efforts should be the creation of global minimum wage to end the global wage disparity. The U.S. and other wealthy nations currently exploit differences in minimum wage and the advantage of current exchange rates to access cheap labor to manufacture goods and extract resources. Workers of the world should be able make a living wage wherever they are without having to leave their homes. And those who do migrate should be afforded livable wages and working conditions. We must listen to the demands of our relatives from the global south, who argue that citizenship for migrants is receiving countries is a human right. Migrants deserve a decent life with full human rights guarantees conferred by citizenship. This should apply not only to future migrants, but the 47 million who currently reside in the United States, regardless of their current legal status. Given the roles of U.S. imperialism, it is wars, economic hoarding, and mass pollution. U.S. citizenship is not the horizon of what we should by trying to achieve when we call for migrant justice. Citizenship efforts should pay special attention to climate migrants who are forced to migrate due to climate change caused by the global north and the United States in particular. We must hold the U.S. accountable for driving climate change. We must organize campaigns that force the U.S. to pay reparations for war and climate debts. The U.S. climate debt, calculated through the amount of carbon emission released into the atmosphere, compared the valuable quote-unquote budget of atmospheric gases, has estimated in 2015 to be at least $4 trillion. As many nations of the global south have stated, repaying the debt of colonialism and imperialism in full will be impossible for wealthy nations to refuse to change the relationship to poorer nations. Reparations will ensure that countries in the global south will be able to develop sustainably and guarantee sustainable livelihoods for their citizens, thereby decreasing immigration and raising the quality of life for all. As a matter of justice and reparations, we must also organize campaigns to eliminate restrictive immigration policies in the U.S. This should entail shutting down the camps, shutting down all detention facilities, abolishing ICE, ending family separation, and allowing people to migrate freely. Area 2. Free and sustainable housing. It's good. How's everybody doing? I hope everybody's doing all right. Close your eyes, take a breath, and allow yourself to imagine a world here. All people enjoy safe, comfortable housing. Imagine a world where no one is poor or hungry, where all families are allowed to stay together and nurture their homes. Imagine a world where having a home does not depend on money or status, but simply on the fact that you are a human being. Imagine a world where everyone has a true home, not just a shelter, but a real home filled with love, laughter, food, rest, and joy. Now open your eyes and look around at what currently counts as quote-unquote home. Unsheltered relatives sleeping on sidewalks, under tarps, thousands of families living in cars, urban housing filled with cockroaches, and cancer-induced lead. Overcrowding reservations, housings with no running water or heat, and run-down apartment complexes that overcharge for rent and exploit tenants. There is no safety, or dignity under capitalism. Not only do most working class people have no true home, but many do not even have adequate shelter. Millions are one paycheck and in some cases less than a week away from being unsheltered. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, 42,000 to 85,000 natives would be unsheltered if relatives were unable or unwilling to squeeze multi-families into already overcrowded homes. Furthermore, HUD estimates an approximate total of 80,000 new home housing units are needed in tribal areas to combat this invisible housing crisis, a total that matches the more visible 10 years housing plan already in the works for New York City crisis. While poor, working class, and unsheltered people are suffering through this housing crisis, a surplus of empty private properties exists across the United States, and replacement for unsheltered people and families could easily be made if this was a priority. Housing is inaccessible when profit cannot be made of it. Inaccessible when profit cannot be made of it. It is clear that we cannot depend on the capitalist system that values profit over people to fix this ongoing crisis. Much of our attention as leftists and progressive is paid to unsheltered folks those who live on the streets are considered homeless, quote unquote. But it is a house without heat, water, or electricity really a quote unquote home? Is a shelter without the functional kitchen or the safe place to sleep really a home? A 2016 article in The Atlantic noted that of the 135 million homes in the United States, 30 million are hazardous. This means 30 million families are regularly and unfairly exposed to health risks like asthma, or oh my gosh, I always mess this one up. What's that called? PHEU. I always mess it up because pneumonia. It's the P, the silent pneumonia, that reduces life expectancy and affects everything from mental health to education. And although heating and electricity for private residents is the greatest contributor to carbon emissions, the mansions and the McMansions belong to the upper classes are clearly responsible for the large chunk of these emissions. After all, how can reservations or urban dwellings without heat or electricity possibly contribute to carbon emissions? Our homes are where we live our lives, and perform basic functions like cooking, eating, sleeping, bathing, and making kin. If we consider the unsafe conditions of housing shelter for a large portion of the working class, then the term homeless, quote unquote, applies to a much larger group of people than those who are unsheltered. We thus propose a program for action that seeks to provide free and sustainable housing for everyone. All people deserve the basic human rights of shelter without having to worry about the possibility of displacement, health risk, or danger. We can implement a number of different strategies and campaigns to work towards this goal. We can organize grassroots direct action to place unsheltered people and families in empty surplus housing. In Albuquerque, for example, there are hundreds of vacant single-family homes on the west side of the city that are immediately available for this type of use. The recent campaign known as Moms for Housing in Oakland, California, and the efforts to house unsheltered families by occupying vacant buildings, it has inspired in other cities, are examples of how direct action lead by unsheltered people can confront houselessness. These types of direct actions place the right to shelter over the profit motives of the housing market. We can move towards ending private ownership of housing entirely by practicing collective living and building tenant-owned housing cooperatives, where housing is held collectively rather than being commodified. Indigenous practices of collective land stewardship directly counter the privatization of property that causes poverty, houselessness, and displacement. Area 3, free and accessible education. A person's access to education, see what time it is, we're doing great. Hold on a second. Let's look down, see who's here. Just making sure, hey everybody who just came in. If I didn't see you and didn't say hi, it's because I was reading. Thank you for coming in, if you're still here. All right. A person's access to education is directly related to the condition of their housing. Many indigenous, black, and migrant children struggle with academic performance in schools because of unstable and hazardous housing. Education is also hindered by lack of access to adequate and free healthcare, learning tools such as computers, phones, and internet service, transportation from home to centers of education. In other words, education is linked to almost every other area of property we have identified in this chapter. There is a unique intersection between gender and sexual inequality, sexual quality and education. For example, LGBTQ plus students are most likely to experience violence in school than other students. 10% of all LGBTQ plus students have reported being threatened with a weapon in school, and 34% report being bullied in school. Transgender students are especially targeted in schools, with recent rules released by the Department of Education under Trump appointed. This is Betsy DeVoy. This is during the 2016 of Trump's name. Betsy DeVoy that discriminated against and excluded trans students by preventing them from reporting harassment, participating in sports, or even using the restroom at school. As with professions such as healthcare workers, teachers, and regions considered quote conservatives or quote right wing, have been at the forefront of militant working class struggle. Education workers are essential workers in the caretaking economy. Teaching is also a highly gendered and undervalued profession. Over 77% of all K through 12 teachers are women, but they make around 20% less than college educated workers in their professions. Teachers in West Virginia, which rank third to the last in teacher paid compared to other states, organized a wildcat strike in 2018 to protest low pay and high cost of health insurance. The vast majority of those strikes were women. Indigenous youth receive some of the poorest education. Since the inception of the indigenous residential schools in the US and Canada, for instance, indigenous children have been stolen from their homes, subjected to physical, verbal, and even SA abuse, to force them to unlearn their languages and cultures and ultimately break indigenous resistance to US dominance. And now I hear he wants to bring them back. And there still are some still. The carceral legacy of boarding schools continues with contemporary child welfare practices that remove Native kids from homes, adopt them into white families, and strip them from their identities. These practices operate in tandem with school policing, and school to prison pipelines. As if there were not enough, graduation rates for Native people are shockingly low. Only 69% of Native students in public schools graduate high school. The percentage drops to 53% of Native students enrolled in Bureau of Indigenous Education schools, some of which are boarding schools. Of all Native students, only 17% go on to college and 13% have post-secondary degrees. In addition, most K-12 cultural curriculum available for Native students is overseen and decided upon by non-Native school boards. Often, public schools are funded by revenue generated from anti-indigenous economic practices. In New Mexico, for example, K-12 schools and post-secondary institutions are funded by oil and gas revenues that violate indigenous sacred sites for profit. This means important gains like teacher salaries, increases the tuition breaks from working class college students are often made at the expense of indigenous people. While this scenario may be true for all contexts, we cannot ignore the fundamental connections that exist between environmental justice, public education, public health, indigenous liberation, housing, and labor. We will not be able to attain free education for everyone if we do not simultaneously address these other issues. Free education simply cannot come at the expense of land, water, or indigenous people. In addition to organizing campaigns and movements to address the other areas of struggle we identify in this chapter. We should demand that tribal leaders and Native educators be in charge of curriculum for Native students, including delivery in public schools that are not under the control of tribal jurisdictions. Until we can end our dependency on fossil fuels and as a form of divestment and reinvestment, the revenue made from gas and oil on reservation and sacred sites should be given directly to Native communities to support their students on and off reservations. We should organize campaigns in our local school districts for mandatory Indigenous history in all K through 12 social study classes. And finally, we can develop a queer feminist labor platform by collaborating with LGBTQ plus student groups and organize with teachers to increase resource and protections. Area 4, free and adequate healthcare. That's interesting. I love it how with the schooling, they talk about the other institutions that surround a student with living, the communities, what everything is drawn into, who they hit. So yeah, it hits all those avenues of approaches and stuff. It really brings in that all these things are needed in order to secure the position of a student to actually get quality and equitable teaching and stuff. Like the climate, like my school, like my neighborhood. Yeah. Area 4, free and adequate healthcare. Let's see what time we're doing. Good on time. I'm gonna look back just in case. Oh no, don't come down with the flu. All right, cool. Yeah, this was in, I think this is, what edition? Is this like 2017? So yeah, statistics have changed, things have changed, but this still is very adequate to understanding like those statistics and how they've gotten worse, and also to understand what needs to be done in a sense. Because like land back, right? Oh, I'm sorry. I hope you're okay. And this is all through the land back. This is oh gosh. Free and adequate healthcare. Here we go. Under capitalism, a worker's worth is tied directly to their ability to generate profit. That's why we're commodities, because we're tools that generate profit. Once our body is broken and no longer able to perform labor for ruling class owners, capitalism does not hesitate to cut workers and their families loose from life-saving income and health insurance. But as the West Virginian teacher wildcat strike pointed out, having quote-unquote good health insurance still does not guarantee adequate health care, nor is it affordable in the majority of the workers who barely make enough monthly premiums to pay for necessity like housing, food, education, and transportation. People attempting to use their private or employers providing health insurance are routinely met with a web of confusing bureaucracy, hidden charges, denials of necessary procedures, and limited pharmacy formularies. I can't say the damn word. Formularies. Yeah. In other words, the current healthcare system in the United States is failing working class people. Because there's a huge thing, and that's what I don't get. Healthcare will save the average worker trillions of dollars. How is that not a good thing? Meanwhile, capitalism dictates every other aspect of healthcare. Pharmaceutical companies drive up prices for essential drugs like insulin, leading to unnatural deaths because people cannot afford medication, attempt to ration or replace their drugs in dangerous ways. Driven by greed, doctors receive kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies to overprescribe addictive medications like opioids, which has caused tens of thousands of overdose deaths in the United States alone. An estimate of 27.5 million people, 8.5% of the U.S. population, went without health insurance in 2018, directly contributing to more deaths. And in 2019, fewer than half of American households could afford a $400 health emergency, even if these families had what is considered good health insurance. Almost as many people report that a $1,000 health emergency would put them on the streets and at risk of going hunger. Consider this: the cost of a motorized wheelchair for a person required mobility assistant can be anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000, which is equivalent to 1 year's salary for minimum wage workers. How are working people supposed to pay for these costs? Many will choose to work instead of seeking care because the costs are so prohibitive. The choice of feeding and clothing their families takes priority. This lowers the quality of life for all and proves that what counts is quote-unquote healthcare under capitalism is simply inhumane. We want healthcare that values everyone's life, and we do mean everyone. There are several interrelated areas of healthcare that need our urgent and special attention, including trans health, nutrition, disability, elder care, reproductive health, dental health, which are falsely seen as separate from healthcare insurance, which I agree that it's not separate. Behavioral health, behavioral and mental health, abortion, addiction, and HIV/AIDS treatments. We can address these by organizing direct health services for unsheltered and poor relatives, including providing regular, free, and nutritious community meals, distributing Narcans, and preventing opioid overdoses, offering needle exchanges, handing out free condoms. We can also organize campaigns to help new mothers. A significant portion of childbirth-related deaths happens in the weeks and months after birth, not during the birthing process itself. Contemporary reproductive health practices completely ignore follow-up care for new mothers, and mothers are often marginalized in ableist activist culture. We can and should change how we organize our liberation to center mothers, families, and children, because they are collective and working class. Grassroots organizations often practice lateral caretaking, especially for those who have been abandoned by society because they are poor or considered abnormal. Caretaking often comes in the form of assisting relatives with material needs like food, transportation, housing, and education that they would not receive otherwise. Grassroots organizations are often safe spaces for relatives who experience social violence in their homes or families. Yeah, it's okay. They're doing it now. All right, head out. Be safe. Sorry if I was too late. We encourage people, especially youth. Oh, wait, did I do that? Yeah. Organizing with other people creates a social context of accountability and relationality that helps with a number of health-related issues, such as anxiety, stress, depression, related to alienation and isolation under capitalism. Instead of taking our anger out on ourselves or our families, organizing allows us to channel our feelings into concrete steps that facilitate our liberation. So they're also saying that organization is something that allows you to hone in on that energy, to put it somewhere, to put it to action, to put it in changing material conditions. And so like again, like they're saying this like in 2000 something, I forgot. But this is what is needed today. Organization. We must organize with our fellow comrades, because when you're in organizations and in with a group of people, you're safer, more taken care of, being able to direct your energies towards changes and stuff. Instead of taking our angers out on ourselves or our families, organizing allows us to channel our feelings into concrete steps that facilitate our liberation. To put it simply, organizing makes you feel good because you are supported and part of a group working towards a common destiny of well-being, building grassroots organization. Area 5. Free, reliable, and accessible public transportation and infrastructure. Public transportation is not a funding priority for federal or city governments, despite surveys showing that over 70% of people in the United States want better public transportation. In fact, it is often one of the first services that city councils will withdraw funds from to funnel towards other areas. Conversely, law enforcement routinely receives the majority of state and city funds, with almost 3 times more funding than public transportation, and increases each year. In Pennsylvania, for example, funding is actively and intentionally diverted from public transit programs and funneled into police departments. Transit security also commits a significant portion of the overall police violence that Black, Indigenous, and migrant workers experience. Living near city-run bus stops and major routes can make or break a worker's ability to maintain a job or access healthcare services. Yet there are obstacles even when public transit is available. Landlords and developers capitalize on transit infrastructures and raise housing prices, and properties close to transit and major roadways, degentrifying, treating access to transportation as a luxury rather than a basic human right. While public transit releases fewer emissions per person than private vehicles, it is not accessible to most workers, 10% of whom do not have access to private vehicles. And in many metropolitan areas, less than 50% of workplaces are accessible by public transportation. This percentage shrinks even further when we consider that an quote-unquote accessible workplace is one that can be reached within 90 days. Who wants to commute 90 minutes for a minimum wage job? Lack of public transportation and poor road conditions in and around reservations make travel for basic necessities like groceries, healthcare, and school difficult for many Native folks. Road maintenances on reservation roads can be funded up to 10 times less per mile, $500, than what is allocated for the state or city roads, $5,000. Road conditions are often poor, with over 60% of roads unpaved and almost a quarter of bridges deficient, making public transportation a serious public health hazard for Native people. Indigenous nations are often unable to address these conditions because they often and maintain less than 10% of reservation roads. The lack of funding for infrastructure within indigenous nations is an obvious form of abandonment on the part of state actors. Access to reliable transportation is one of the biggest factors in maintaining or preventing poverty and even life itself. Organizing for free, reliable and accessible public transportation and infrastructure must therefore be an area of priority for the left. We must organize campaigns to therefore be an area of priority for, We must organize campaigns to increase operation hours and route
areas of service, which in turn would mean more jobs for bus drivers whose labor struggles should always be connected to movement for free and accessible public transportation. In order to wage successful campaigns, we must realize that of all federal transportation operations, 80% goes to highways, whereas only 20% goes towards transient. The vast majority of these funds line the pockets of private contractors who make a profit for infrastructure projects and automobile corporations who lobby to improve highways so that consumers will continue to purchase and drive private vehicles. Yeah, because you know what? I would love trains. I would love to have so many light rails, I would love that. I would choose that if it was readily and available and like that. I would not drive my car. This means the majority of public money, our money, goes towards inflating the profits of the ruling class. We must advocate for public money to go to operational costs like drivers' wages, gas, and bus maintenances, which creates stable employment for thousands of working class people. We can also advocate for city governments to stop paying private corporations with public money and instead funnel federal appropriations into subsidized transit, so it is free for everyone regardless of income and access to resources. We should also utilize the present energy behind defunding the police to demand less armed police and security on public transit. We can also advocate for city governments to defund law enforcement for general and put those funds into better public transit. In addition to these considerations, it is important to understand that transit systems often own a significant portion of the land in cities, especially land adjacent to important routes. This land can be used for building affordable homes that are close to these routes rather than being sold and leased to real estate developers for the purpose of gentrification. Combining housing justice with calls for better public transportation in our local organizing can facilitate these connections and strengthen our efforts to support poor and working class populations in urban areas. Finally, we must acknowledge that the call for better public transportation is also a sovereignty issue because indigenous nations need jurisdictions over their roads to improve them. We should always advocate in our public transit campaigns for indigenous people to have complete sovereignty over their lands and infrastructures, including roadways, highways, and transportation systems. Area 6. How's everybody? We're getting to the last bit of this. Not many people stayed. Oh well. Area 6. Non-carceral mental health support and no more self-unalivings. Native people in North America have some of the highest rates of self-unaliving, not only in the country, but in the world. We are not alone. LGBTQ plus relatives and members of the poor and working class from the global south commit unaliving at extremely high rates. What kind of suffering must our relatives be experiencing to decide that unaliving themselves is their only option? The United States unalive is the second leading cause of deaths for people between the ages of 15 to 34. A reality that closely parallels statistics of the rest of the world, where self-unaliving is the second leading cause of death for people aged 15 to 24. Studies vary widely when it comes to determining whether self-unaliving have increased or decreased under neoliberalism. But they agree that men commit self-unaliving 3 or 4 times more than women. Although women typically attempt unaliving 3 times more than men, and are twice as likely to experience depression. The LGBTQ plus youth are 3 times more likely to attempt unaliving themselves than cisgender heterosexual youth. And 41% of transgender adults report having attempted self-unaliving at some point of their lives. Although studies and statistics on self-unaliving are incomplete, it is clear that self-unaliving is linked to race, poverty, gender, and colonialism. For example, Arizona, New York, Utah, Washington, Montana, South Dakota, and Wyoming rank among the states with the highest self-unaliving rates in the country. What do these states have in common? They have a high native population. Native people by self-unaliving at rates higher than any other demographic in the United States, and our youth are especially at high risk across the board. Men, women, gender non-conforming people alike. How often do we hear stories of youth unalivings, self-unalivings, often in clusters of 4 or more within a short time period and geographic location, happening in Native communities. Youth self-unaliving deaths are so common in indigenous country that it is impossible to talk. Who's this? Okay, thank you. It is impossible. Hold on a second. Where was like gender and how often are these stories in the clusters and 4 and within the periods of the social have happened in Native communities? Youth okay. Country that it is impossible to talk about healthcare, mental health, gender, sexuality, education, housing, or incarceration without talking about self-unaliving. Our alarm and our action should match the magnitude of the crisis. Native youth are the literal future of our nation, future caretakers and caretakers of the future. Every time a young Native person dies of self-unaliving, we lose a relative who might have played an important role in leading our people into the future. Their deaths, rather by self-unaliving of violence, are one of the most devastating realities we face as indigenous revolutionaries engaged in the future-oriented project of decolonization. We simply cannot claim to be doing revolutionary work unless we are aggressively and proactively organizing to stop self-unaliving among our youth, men, women, LGBTQ plus community, and poor relatives. There are particular areas that need our urgent attention. Access to mental health services in indigenous communities is limited and often expensive. As a result, the correlations between mental health issues like depression and self-unaliving rates are overlooked, especially for youth. Indigenous children face extremely high rates of types of violence from an early age. Violence accounts for 75% of deaths for Native youth between the ages of 12 and 20. There is a strong correlation between early exposures to violence, mental health, and self-unaliving. More than 90% of people who died from self-unaliving suffer from depression, have a substance abuse disorder, or both. We must address depression and substance abuse in order to address self-unaliving. However, this is not an issue that can be fixed through better services or self-unaliving prevention campaigns. Studies have show that self-unaliving rates are lower in Native communities than have strong self-determination over land. Okay, so that's what they're doing. Education, health, and governance. Of the thousands of people who lived, worked, and struggled together during the occupation of Standing Rock in 2016, not a single one died by self-unaliving. The resistant camps were dominated by Native people who are otherwise surrounded by the violence and death of colonialism that causes self-unaliving in the first place. One would expect self-unaliving to be a commonplace in the camps as in any other Native community. But during this brief period of time, Indigenous people were free. Everyone was sheltered, fed, cared for, and welcomed into ceremonial spaces. Everyone had a special role in maintaining the camp, and all community members had across the culture knowledge of free education. For many, it was the first time they received positive affirmations for being Indigenous, which results in pride and dignity. And it was not only Indigenous people who benefited from this Indigenous form of special and political organization. Non-Native community members in the camps were treated with the same dignity and respect as Native people. What we saw at Standing Rock was truly self-governing, Indigenous-led form of self-determination. It was a liberated zone. We therefore know that workers and what we need to do in order to reverse the trend of self-unaliving for all people, to restore dignity to Indigenous values. And the only way this will happen is if everyone promotes decolonization and return of Indigenous lands and true self-determination of Indigenous people. This might be the last section. So, Indigenous sovereignty, self-determination is the liberation of all peoples. Land back means liberation and free from poverty and exploitation and capitalism. And a return, and this is something that they say here in the South, that the South is New Africa that's afforded to the people that have been captured and taken to serve as slaves here. And they're in congruence with the Indigenous population out here. They're working in coalitions out here, I hear. All right. Area 7, healthy, sustainable, and abundant food. Food is not only considered physical subsistence, I think. Subsistence, yeah, I said it right. But also a connection to emotional and spiritual spaces that have nourished our people. As Wayona Leduc has argued, food security is necessary in order for the nation to have political independency. But because we exist in a capitalist system, food, like everything else, is subject to the logic of profit and class inequality. The result is that we are weak and dependent on processed food, incapable of growing our own food and exerting true independence. Despite the United States being the largest food exporter in the world and the third in total food production, most poor and working class people are forced to eat unhealthy food or simply go hungry. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, around 41 million people in the United States face food insecurity, including 13 million children. What if the 30 to 40% of the food produced in the United States was wasted and dumped in landfills? Over 161 million pounds was given to families in need. That's a question mark. Food insecurity is not only about lack of access to food, it is also about poor access to healthy and fresh foods for millions of people. Quote unquote food deserts are an issue across the United States, from lower income communities and of color to mostly white conservative communities. For food insecurity and lack of access are a significant problem. Reservations are especially affected. Almost half the reservation residents have incomes 3 times lower than the federal poverty level. A household of 5 in 2019 had an annual income of less than $30,170. A 2014 report from the USDA found a fewer than 26% of reservation households live within 1 mile of a supermarket. Moreover, of those living in extreme low-income conditions of reservations, less than 28% live within walking distance from a supermarket, whereas 64% of low-income individuals live in other parts of the United States can walk to get food. This means half of all Native people live in reservations cannot afford a private vehicle or fuel required to make the long trip required to access grocery stores. Even if they do make it to a grocery store, they are barely able to afford even the cheapest food, which is filled with refined sugar, saturated fats, and carcinogens. As if this were not enough, convenience stores located in reservations lack healthier food items. When available, the cost of healthy food diet is significantly higher. The solution for this problem cannot be found in creating more access to quote unquote affordable foods by building more dollar stores or fast food restaurants. Across indigenous communities, there is a new interest in food sovereignty. Although peasant communities in the global south define food sovereignty as a right to control the food that you grow and eat, indigenous food sovereignty movements are focused on rekindling long-standing relationships with the land. Indigenous food sovereignty movements are about healthy revitalization, language conservation, and connecting youth with elders. We must build a food sovereignty movement to provide healthy, sustainable, and abundant food for everyone. You can promote food sovereignty by supporting local community food groups and COOPs, organizing a community garden and seed banks, financing and opening municipal-owned grocery stores, and creating community organizations that feed people, like the Food Not Bonds people that do it here. Yeah, and they get like 80. Like I remember they get like over 100 citations from the police. An excellent example of this is Potbagurz. It's Potbangrz. Feed the Body mission in St. Louis, Missouri. It started to feed unsheltered people and adapted to feeding thousands of protesters for participating in the Ferguson uprising in 2014, responding to the police murder of Michael Brown and many others. Let's see here. Let me see what the next one is. See how long it is. Because I got 10 minutes. Okay, I can do the next one. Next one. This might be it. Clean water and land and air. Decades of wait, did I do that right? Yeah. Decades of coal mining, uranium mining, and burning the coal in power plants that surround indigenous lands have contributed to higher asthma rates and possibly contributes to greater instances of cancer in indigenous communities. In the Permian Basin in Texas, Permian, Permian Basin in Texas. Oops. An increase in fracking since the early 2000s has led to higher methane rates that affect air quality in the Pacific Northwest. The warming of waters and rising of sea levels due to climate change has affected land and water ecosystems and disseminated I can never do this. Salmon. There we go. Is salmon or salmon? Salmon. They say salmon population. And in the Midwest, Monsanto's, ooh, I hate Monsanto's. They're fucking horrible. Farms release chemicals into the river that make water undrinkable and even dangerous to touch for millions. These acts of violence against Mother Earth have not gone unchallenged by indigenous organizers. In 2015, Dene farmers and ranchers in the four corner regions of the United States organized to clean the AMANIMAS and San Juan rivers after they were contaminated by the Gold King mine spill. In early 2016, thousands of water protectors fought against the Dakota Access Pipeline to protect Minnesota, or the Missouri River, which is one of the largest waterways in North America. In 2019, indigenous people in Brazil, Paraguay, and Bolivia fought to stop the burning of their homelands in the Amazon, which many consider to be the result of deforestation. The 21st century has seen catastrophic assaults on the earth and suppression of indigenous caretakers who protect and defend the waters and lands that comprise the world's lungs and arteries. This devastation has happened in the name of profit. For the capitalists of the world, clean air, clean water, and air do not matter so long as there is a buck to be made by plundering them. As a consequence, Earth and all life that depends on her is dying. The environmental justice movement was started in the 1980s by poor Black communities seeking protection from disastrous health effects of industrial pollution and toxic waste dumping, which disproportionately affect poor Black and indigenous communities. However, non-governmental NGOs and nonprofit organizations dominate the environmental sector today. These organizations typically deploy a conservationist approach that uses law to protect nature for development. The problem with conservation is that it seeks party between these seemingly opposing goals as the ideal outcome. Conservationists often try to strike a compromise between protection and development to win their campaigns. The notion of sustainability, quote unquote, is the formula that commonly drives this compromise. Sustainability describes as desired balance between industrial pollution and environmental health that allows everyone to win and feel good about protecting the environment. However, even when they do win their campaigns, which are typically lawsuits and policy reforms, conservationists are only able to protect small amounts of land and water, which are typically already compromised by industry. This incremental and piecemeal approach to ensure clean land, air, and water is depressing. It operates from the deficient rather than a position of strength. Conservation has certainly won some important games for environmental justice, but it is ultimately a struggle for crumbs that offers defensive possibilities at best. Moreover, because it emphasizes on concession, it does not provide a strong foundation from which to build power, nor is it capable of advancing a strong analysis and stance on capitalism beyond asking ruling class corporations to practice more sustainable and ethical forms of capitalism. Why would we continue to put energy and resources into an approach that already admitted defeat in the face of capitalism? We need a movement that decenters conservation and the NGOs and nonprofits that continue to consume considerable amount of resources and power for our conservation campaigns. These resources should be redistributed to the people and communities who hold the solution and knowledge about how to fight for and take care of the land, water, and air, indigenous people. Divesting from the nonprofit industrial complex is especially urgent given the reality we currently face on a planetary level: decolonization or extinction. We thus encourage everyone to seriously question who we take leadership from in our movement. We recommend that all indigenous begin to divest a new paradigm of struggle to address climate justice and does not reproduce the trap of conservation. We should all be looking to grassroots indigenous and frontline organizations in the global south who are calling for far more visionary, militant, creative, and comprehensive climate justice programs than those that global north environmentalists can offer. These movements tend to also have a strong ethical foundation when it comes to capitalism and the U.S. imperialism. We can contribute to draw from these movements by educating and organizing and permanently halt fracking, mining, and all types of resource restrictions in indigenous communities. We can use the billions of dollars that are funneled into NGOs and nonprofits each year to create new jobs in land, air, and water restoration that will be lost by the demise of the extractive industry. We can unconditionally support indigenous-led movements and grassroots organizations that protect air, land, and water. We can study the implements of People's Agreement of it's Cochabamba, Bolivia, which we reference throughout the Red Deal. And we can refuse to let capitalism destroy our future any longer. And that's where I'll stop. Perfect. Next will be Area 8-9, ending gender, sexual and domestic violence. Brilliant. Loved it. Add a bookmark. Where do I add bookmark? There's where I add a bookmark. Got it. Hold on. Bookmarks. All right. That is saved and bookmarked. Perfect. All right. That is a huge win. It's a huge win. I'm on board. I've been on board, but I want to support the Red Nation more. I'm gonna figure out how to do that. What's up?
What's up? Well, you know my question. I don't even think I have to ask it.
When it comes to housing and stuff like that, and education and healthcare, they really put the interconnections of what needs to happen. Like, for instance, how does a student's household affect their process in engaging in education? How's their health do it? How's their mental health do it? And then connecting that to, well, we should provide healthcare and stuff like that for these things. You know what I mean? So, like, it draws a distinction that, like, it takes a huge community in order for even one child to be successfully nourished and taken care of fully. You know what I mean?
And I probably should have rephrased what I stated to Doodley last night, now that I think about it. They didn't cover as much as I wanted them to cover about the disability community. But they did cover stuff on it, like when they got into it, because they even stated how they're like the medical system uses eugenics and ableism and stuff like that. So, like, it does cover that, but, like, it doesn't cover it as much as I'd want.
Yeah, understandable, and that could be a critique, but the point is that they did mention how ableism is, how it affects the mental of someone that's disabled and how it can lead to other disabled people to self-unaliving. So they did draw the distinction in how that is. But I agree, they could have gone more in depth. They probably could have had a whole section of it, right? In a sense. The small critique.
Right, like it's more of a smaller critique than a large critique, but I did like how they did tie in with the different things, and I still always have like this, how like in each section they will go ahead and like tie in different communities into them, but like I do feel like there's some more things, and that's also why I started writing mine when I did, is because I wanted to make sure that I covered the things that I felt like they left out.
Yeah. Have you thought about joining the Red Nation, or is that specific to certain people? Like, how's that work? I know it's probably a strictly indigenous led org, right?
It is strictly indigenous led, but That doesn't mean it doesn't have water protectors and land protectors and
Yeah.
other comrades and so forth.
Yeah. Oh, when they mentioned Standing Rock and how they developed an environment, they called it the liberated zone, and how like people were able to like it wasn't just like, yes, they were there to do work, but also at the same time they were there to heal each other and to give each other validations. And like I loved it how they like even like brought in other people that were non-white. They were able to engage in ceremonies and stuff like that and actually feel liberation and how it like did that. I love that distinction. I know that Standing Rock was a huge thing and stuff like that, but for them to even go into further details to tell us like it was basically a liberated zone was really awesome. I love that. That brought me back to Mao, because Mao had liberating zones when it came to like, you know, the Civil War and revolution and stuff. So I loved it too.
Yeah,
sorry,
at Standing Rock, the prime example of Standing Rock, we had a lot of people that were there to help out with Standing Rock that were not just indigenous people. And a lot of people misunderstand that and don't realize that it wasn't just indigenous people at Standing Rock. There was other people there too. They just get left out because for some reason.
It should be centered on. It should be centered on the indigenous people, because me as a settler should probably ask permission at all times to fight alongside. You know what I mean? So
Centered, yes. Left out is something that we are constantly correcting.
yes,
Because when you leave the other aspects out, you make it seem like we're being exclusionary.
yeah,
But we're not. It was just indigenous led. That's all it was.
yes, and I love that, because it should be elevating the voices of non-settlers over settlers, of course, and also who better knows how to engage into these things than non-settlers, right? So we need to always not one elevate, but also listen and do as like they say for us to do. You know what I mean? Because like as a white person, I am already afforded all the you know, the powers of whiteness, you know, and like that is a huge like big huge blinder on me. So when I go to these things, I would say that because I have these blinders, I need to listen to the people that are leading this, especially indigenous voices, and just be like, okay, cool, you want me to do this? I'll go do that. You know what I mean? You know?
No, and I fully get that. I did see that Joe said they have critiques, so I'd love to hear those critiques. If it's in a Discord, that's cool. I don't know if it's about the book or not, but
It'll be in the Discord, probably. So that's cool. But yeah. So like this book is very, very good, and I recommend anybody to read it. You know what I mean? It's a call to action. It comes up like it's really poignant of what we can do now to create like the black, and a lot of it like brings me back to the Black Panther Party and how they created like they help people understand their pew rights to start developing, you know, survival programs to help us get through this, to come up with an alternative as we do the revolution. You know what I mean? So a lot of that is hidden here too. They're talking about what we need to do now, how we need to organize now, what kind of things we need to set up. And they're also calling people to organize, because they're saying too that organization brings safety to individuals. You know what I mean?
correct.
And I love that too, because that's true.
I would
Organizations bring safety to people.
I always say when I recommend Red Deal is this is a for now, not the future.
Yeah.
As in like this is what the beginning goals are, but not like looking later into like the end stage goals. Because like of course things are going to evolve and adapt later on, but this is more of a like how we start to get to that next step.
Yeah, yeah, and I like it because it really draws into the fact. And I don't know. I feel like even with me, we forget that the earth, and I'm going to say this: the earth is another form of like a proletariat or whatever you may call it, being exploited from profits and extraction. You know what I mean? So it's doing it. It's another form, and like they're right. I mean, we need to understand that. Like, yes. We have contradictions and we have ways, but one of the biggest contradictions is how how capitalist nations engage with the earth and how it's destroying the earth. You know, like we need to remember that big, huge element. Because if we do liberation without realizing that the revitalization of the earth and shit like that, then it means nothing, right? Because the earth will do its thing and then we'll just be like gone. So what was the point of that, all that, right? There was no point of that. So we have to consider within our revolutions, within our liberation practices, the earth. Because the earth sustains us. And it still sustains us, even if it's being attacked harshly, you know?
And I agree with that. Like, this is why I said this is more of like one of those books you recommend someone first starting to read from an indigenous perspective, moving into more readings, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, but no, I'm digging this book. It's getting better, and it just gets better and better. And did you hear me kind of read when I was kind of upset because like they're naming off all this stuff and like, yeah, like fuck this place. You're right. You pointed this out. Yeah, fuck that too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it does that.
You know. So,
what page did you? What did you in like? What was the last thing you read? I didn't catch the very last.
Let me go get it. Hold on. Oh, I do like how they focus on what borders do and how violent they are and who particularly it affects more. I like how they draw the distinctions, and it also brings in the fact that yes, I want to live regionally. Fuck these border shit. We can live regionally. Regionally is not bad. It's a good thing. It's okay because regions cross over. So the last thing I read was here, let me read it a little bit. We should all be looking to grassroots indigenous and frontline organizations in the global south who are calling for far more visionary, militant, creative, and comprehensive climate justice programs that the global north environmentalists can offer. These movements tend to also have a strong ethical foundation when it comes to capitalism and U.S. imperialism. We can contribute and draw from these movements by educating and organizing to permanently halt fracking, mining, and all types of resource extractions in indigenous communities. We have, it's the NGOs and the nonprofits that they're like, fuck them too. We can use the billions of dollars that are funneled into NGOs and profits each year to create new jobs in land, air, and water restoration that will be lost by the demise of the extractive industries. We can unconditionally support indigenous-led movements and grassroots organizations that protect air, water, and land. I did the whole dyslexia thing. We can study and implement the People's Agreement of the Bolivian, it's Cochabamba, which we reference throughout the Red Deal and can refuse to let capitalism destroy our future. So they went there, they went to Bolivia, and they had the huge conference of indigenous people talking about these things because, again, makes me wonder if they talk to like one of the Brazilian Maoist movements out there that is indigenous led too, you know?
We do. We go back and forth between them. It's something that they don't mention in the book, but we do. Like, we talk to the different movements across and from indigenous led movements.
Yeah.
So it's guaranteed that they have. But yeah, I mean, how much more do you have left? What page was that on? I can't remember.
I'm on page. It's 164 pages, I think. I am on page 87, so I have at least 60 more pages to go because it's 143 pages long.
Yeah, it's not super long.
It doesn't matter. It drives to the point. It's a book that calls you to action, that should drive you to action, especially like people that don't know much about like communism. This book, if you're listening and honing in on it and you're not quite a communist and you're kind of figuring out where you sit, should drive you to like, holy fuck, we should like move into like liberation stuff and everything like that. Like, this is a book to call to action. Like any other book like this should call you to action, you know?
Right, and that's exactly what the book is meant to do, is to drive people into action, kind of like motivate them to do so. So, like, that's why I really actually like this book. But I was just wondering where you were on the pages, because it starts to get even a little more intensifying on driving towards action near the end of the book. So you're getting to the part where if you feel like you're getting driven towards action now, it's going to get even more near the end.
I like how it also was intersectional and calling out the indigenous women and all of them stuff as vital. They talked about like teachers being mostly by women. They talked about reproduction and stuff like that for women, and how it is a labor, it is a value that is not seen. So they didn't say exactly like that, but they did bring in the fact that women, you know what I mean, drives a lot of these things too. And that was amazing too. You know what I mean?
Well, that's from an indigenous perspective. Without the women, we have no, like, that's an indigenous perspective from a matriarchal perspective. So
yeah,
that's the reason why.
Yeah. I'm ready for the matriarchy. Fuck this fucking patriarchal system. Fuck it. I'm done with it. But yeah. Does anybody have anything else before I close out so I can go feed Rufus and stuff? Do you have anything else?
Other thing I'm going to add is give Rufus all the loves. With that being said, I'll talk to you a little bit later. I'm assuming people are going to hop into Discord and have a conversation. So, but I'll talk to you later. Bye.
All right, thank you. All right, everybody. I'm gonna end it. I appreciate everybody. Same day, same time tomorrow. Let's see how we can get through this. But this has been amazing. I like this book, and I'm glad we started it on Remembrance Day or Recognition. I can't remember. Yeah. So I'm glad we started this book on the day it started. So, all right, everybody.